My daughter-in-law handed me a list of rules to see my grandson, so I gave my son an envelope. I never thought a piece of paper could hurt more than a broken heart, until I saw that list. It was typed, organized, numbered, like a contract, like an ultimatum disguised as guidelines. I stood in the doorway of my son's living room holding it, my breath shallow and my mind reeling. Number 1 on the list read, visits must be pre-scheduled at least 48 hours in advance. Number 2, physical contact allowed only if agreed upon before the visit. Number 3, do not discuss disciplinary methods, political views, or family finances in his presence. And that was only the beginning. As I scanned the page, a knot formed in my chest. Not grief, not anger, but confusion sharpened into pain. It wasn't that I minded rules. I raised 3 children of my own. I understood boundaries. I understood respect. But this felt unlike any list I had ever received. This felt like exclusion dressed up as structure. This felt like distance disguised as love. And on top of all of it, there was a single line at the bottom in bold. Failure to follow these rules will result in further restricted access. Restricted access. To my own grandson. The idea settled in my bones like a cold stone. A week earlier, I'd been babysitting little Oliver while my son, his father, worked late at the office. We'd made pancakes, read books, tickled toes and giggled until his laugh sounded like a chime. I kissed his cheek when his mom walked in that evening. No list, no warning, just, thank you, Mom, and a hug. That had been the last normal moment. The next day, the list appeared, in a crisp white envelope, addressed to me, with no explanation, only rules. Rules about when I could see my grandson. Rules about what I was allowed to say. Rules about how I must behave. Rules upon rules like bricks between us. I paced my living room that afternoon, rereading them and trying to understand what had changed. Had I spoken too much? Had I crossed an invisible line? Had I said something wrong? And then I caught myself. I wasn't trying to figure out how to obey them. I was trying to figure out why they existed at all. That was when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my son, Ethan. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Let's talk. No mention of the list. No context. Just, let's talk. I stared at the text for a long moment before replying. Okay. I didn't know what the conversation would bring. But I knew this. I wasn't going to show up empty-handed. That evening, I drove to their house. The same one where my son and now daughter-in-law, Miranda, had moved after Oliver was born. But this time, my steps felt heavy. When I entered the living room, both of them were seated like a scene set before a play began. Ethan looked exhausted but cautious. Miranda looked guarded. And little Oliver sat playing with blocks on the floor. My heart ached all over again. I smiled at him and crouched down. Hi, sweetheart. He looked up, smiled, and kept building. No rules, no boundaries, just joy. That should have been enough. But then the air shifted. Miranda stood up. Mom, she said in a tone that was polite but cool. We need to go over the visitation guidelines. I didn't flinch. I was prepared. She handed me a second copy of the same list. This one printed on heavier paper, stamped with her initials at the bottom. Ethan didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on Oliver. Well, she said. I took a deep breath. My voice was calm. Rules are fine, I said. Guidelines are understandable. She didn't respond, so I continued. But this list, it feels like conditions. No, she said quickly. It's structure. For everyone's benefit. I nodded slowly. I understand structure. She folded her arms. This is how we do things here. We're protecting Oliver. Protecting Oliver. That phrase struck a nerve. Not because I questioned her intentions, but because I had spent the last 5 years protecting that child's well-being with every ounce of love I had. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single white envelope. It was thick, unsealed, and heavier than anything Miranda had handed me. Ethan looked up then. Confusion flickered in his eyes. "What's that?" he asked gently. I didn't answer him. I looked only at Miranda. "I brought this for you," I said. She blinked. Then she took it slowly. She opened it. Inside was another list. Not rules, not restrictions, but a letter. I didn't read it aloud, but I let her see it. She went still as her eyes scanned each line. Her face shifted through a range of emotions: surprise, recognition, shock, and finally silence. Ethan stepped closer. "What is it?" he asked. She barely looked at him. "Open it," she said to him. He did, and what he saw made his breath catch. It wasn't a list of rules. It was a letter from my late wife, his mother's mother, written the month before she died. In her flowing script were words filled with love, wisdom, and clarity. The letter began, "My dearest, if you're reading this, it means I've already left this world. But I am still here in every heartbeat of our family. I know that life will continue to test you, with joy, with pain, with decisions that feel impossible. If you ever have to decide who raises our grandson, I want you to choose love, not fear. Love trusts. Love comforts. Love forgives. Love guides without binding. If you ever find yourself making rules, let them be bridges, not walls. And if you ever question my mother's love, remember this: she loved you first as her child, and then as the grandmother of her grandchild. Nothing can take that away." Ethan's eyes were wide. Miranda's face softened. They looked at each other, not with confrontation but with realization. And then, they looked at me. "I didn't write that," Miranda whispered. "No," Ethan said slowly. "That was your mother's voice," I said quietly. "Not mine." Miranda let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. And for the first time that evening, there was no edge in her posture. Just something heavier, understanding. But the letter wasn't the end. There was more. A second page. A paragraph at the bottom in smaller print. "If there is ever a dispute about visitation or guardianship, I want my son and daughter-in-law to discuss it with the most important voice in this family, the child's. Oliver should be asked, and his happiness must guide every decision." Both Ethan and Miranda read it again, silently. Then they looked at little Oliver, still engrossed in his blocks. Ethan knelt beside him. "Buddy," he said gently. Oliver looked up. "Daddy? Grandma here?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "Grandma's here." The room was quiet. Then Ethan turned back to us. "He wants Grandma to read to him." Miranda's eyes glistened. "He said it yesterday when I asked who he wanted at bedtime," she admitted. I smiled at Oliver. He didn't speak words yet, he was too young, but his eyes were bright, joyful, unconditional. He pointed to me. That was his answer. Not words, just truth. Miranda exhaled slowly. "Maybe we went too far," she said softly. "No," I replied gently. "You were trying to protect him. I just wanted to make sure he wasn't confused," she said. "I understand," I said. "Maybe the rules weren't the right approach. We can start fresh," I offered. Ethan looked between us. "We can," he said. "And maybe," Miranda continued uncertainly, "we listen more to what Oliver wants." That sentence, innocent as it sounded, felt like a peace treaty. That night, over homemade lasagna, silence wasn't awkward. It was reflective. No one spoke rules. No one referenced lists. We simply talked. About small things first. School. Oliver's favorite songs. His new favorite book. His mispronunciations. His laugh. Real things. Human things. Then Ethan looked at me. "Mom, I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked gently. "For assuming. For not seeing the letter. For thinking rules were the answer." I smiled. "You wanted the best for him." "Yes," he said. "But I forgot the best people don't need rules. They need connection." Miranda nodded. "I think what I wanted was not control," she admitted. "I wanted certainty." We all understood that. Parenting is fear disguised as discipline, and love is patience disguised as trust. Little Oliver leaned back in his chair. "Grandma, read story now?" he asked. I nodded. Which one? He pointed to the stack of books on the coffee table. And in that moment nothing else mattered. Not lists, not rules, not restrictions. Just the simple truth. A child chooses love. Not conditions. Not clauses. Not boundaries without presence. Just love. And so I opened the first book. And I read. The piece that night felt fragile. Like glass set carefully on a high shelf. Beautiful. But one wrong movement away from shattering. After dinner, after the story, after Oliver fell asleep with his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, Miranda walked me to the door. Her voice was softer than before. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, "but knowing doesn't erase impact. And impact doesn't vanish overnight." As I drove home, something kept tugging at my mind. The letter had helped. It had softened the edges. But it hadn't answered the real question. Why had Miranda felt the need for such strict control in the first place? Because people don't create walls without fear behind them. And fear always has a source. 3 days later, I received a call from Ethan. His voice sounded tense. "Mom, can you come over? Is Oliver okay?" I asked immediately. "Yes, he's fine." That "but" was hanging in the silence. "But," I pressed gently, "there's something we need to talk about." That tone again. The same tone from before the list. Measured, guarded, heavy. I arrived within 20 minutes. This time, the atmosphere felt different. Not confrontational, but unsettled. Miranda was sitting at the dining table with papers spread out in front of her. Financial statements, bank summaries, legal-looking documents. My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" I asked. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "We've been under pressure," he admitted. "Pressure," I repeated. Miranda exhaled slowly. "When Oliver was born, we upgraded everything. Bigger house, better daycare, new car." Ethan added quietly, "My promotion didn't come through." Silence filled the room. I looked at the papers again. Loan balances, mortgage increases, credit card statements. And suddenly the list made sense. This wasn't about control. This was about stress. Miranda spoke again, her voice thinner now. "When we're stressed, I feel like everything's out of control. So I create structure. And the structure became rules," I said gently. She nodded. "I thought if I controlled small things, I could manage the big things." Ethan leaned against the counter. "And I didn't stop it." He looked ashamed. "I should have told you earlier, Mom." "Why didn't you?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because you've already helped us so much over the years." There it was. The real weight. They didn't want to look like they were failing. Pride, fear, and exhaustion mixed together. Miranda picked up one of the documents and slid it toward me. "It's not disastrous," she said quickly. "But we're stretched thin." I studied the numbers. They weren't drowning, but they were walking too close to the edge. "You thought I would interfere?" I asked quietly. Miranda's eyes filled slightly. "I thought you would judge us." The irony almost made me smile. "I raised a son alone for 8 years after his father passed," I said softly. "I know what financial pressure looks like." Ethan's eyes lifted. "You never told me it was that hard." "That's because children don't need to carry their parents' worries," I replied. Silence again. Heavy. Real. Then Miranda surprised me. "I think," she said carefully, "I was afraid that if Oliver spent too much time here, he'd prefer your house." The honesty landed like a stone dropped into still water. Waves rippled through the room. "I don't want to compete with you," she admitted. "I want to be his mother." And suddenly, I saw it clearly. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about control. It wasn't even about finances. It was about insecurity. The quiet, unspoken fear of not being enough. I sat down across from her. "Miranda," I said gently, "a child can love more than one person deeply." She swallowed. "I know that logically. But emotionally?" I asked. She nodded faintly. "It's harder." Ethan reached for her hand. "I didn't realize how much pressure you were carrying." She gave him a small look. "Neither did you." That was the real crack. Not between her. We're irresponsible. I stepped closer. Financial stress doesn't make you irresponsible. Hiding it makes it worse. They both nodded slowly. Okay, Ethan said. Tell us what to do. There it was. Not control. Not ego. Not fear. Just humility. I didn't write a check. I didn't solve everything overnight. Instead, I pulled out a notebook. We start here, I said. Budget breakdown. Expense prioritization. Refinancing options. Practical steps. No lectures. No shame. Just guidance. 3 hours later, the panic had reduced to a plan. Miranda exhaled deeply. I feel like I can breathe again. Ethan looked at me differently. Not as someone imposing, but as someone steady. You always do this, he said quietly. Do what? Show up. I smiled faintly. That's what family does. Upstairs, Oliver stirred and began to cry. Miranda instinctively stood. Then she paused. Do you want to get him? She asked me. The question meant more than she realized. Not a rule. Not a restriction. An invitation. I nodded. When I entered his room, he reached for me immediately. Grandma. One word. Pure trust. Pure love. And in that moment I understood something clearly. The list had never been about keeping me away. It had been about fear of losing control. Now, the fear was slowly dissolving. But I also sensed something else. Growth is uncomfortable. And sometimes, when walls fall, hidden truths surface. And not all of them are gentle. As I rocked Oliver back to sleep, I overheard voices downstairs. Quiet, tense, not angry, but serious. When I returned to the living room, they stopped talking. Ethan looked uneasy. Miranda avoided my eyes. What is it? I asked calmly. Ethan hesitated. There's something else. Miranda's fingers twisted together. It's about the house. And the way she said it told me this wasn't just about money. This was about something deeper. Something they hadn't yet revealed. The air in the room felt heavier after Miranda said those 4 words. It's about the house. Not the car. Not the loans. The house. The place where Oliver had taken his first steps. Where birthdays were celebrated. Where family dinners happened. Where the infamous list had been handed to me. I sat down slowly. What about the house? I asked gently. Ethan rubbed his face with both hands. We refinanced 6 months ago. I blinked. That's normal. Miranda shook her head. We didn't just refinance. Silence. My stomach tightened. We extended the term, Ethan said carefully. 30 years. You're young, I replied. That's not unusual. Miranda's voice trembled slightly. We also pulled equity out. There it was. The missing piece. How much? I asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. Miranda answered instead. Almost everything we could. The room went silent. I didn't react immediately, because panic doesn't fix mistakes, and judgment only deepens shame. What did you use it for? I asked calmly. Ethan looked away. Renovations. New furniture. Clearing some old debt. And, I pressed gently. Miranda swallowed. An investment. That word landed like a dropped glass. What kind of investment? I asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. A friend's business. I leaned back slowly. What business? A startup, he said. Technology. Supposed to scale fast. Supposed to. I repeated softly. Miranda's eyes filled. It didn't. How much did you invest? I asked. Ethan's voice was barely audible. 200,000. For a moment the world felt very still. Not because of the amount, but because of the risk. And because they had done it alone. Without advice. Without protection. Without backup. Is it gone? I asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. All of it. Now everything made sense. The stress. The control. The rules. The need for structure. When you lose that much money in silence, you start tightening everything else. You try to control what you can. You create lists, boundaries. Then stop fighting the wrong enemy. I said quietly. The enemy isn't each other. It's the pressure. We spent the next hour mapping possibilities, refinancing options again, temporary relocation plans, budget restructuring. But as we talked, I sensed something shifting beneath the surface, something unspoken, something Miranda wasn't saying. She was quieter than before, watching Ethan more closely, as if weighing something. Finally, she stood. "I need some air," she said. She stepped outside. Ethan exhaled heavily. "She blames herself," he admitted. "For what?" "For pushing the renovation. For wanting everything perfect." "Do you blame her?" I asked. He shook his head immediately. "No, I blame myself." "Then stop," I said firmly. He looked at me. "Blame freezes growth." He nodded slowly. "I just don't want Oliver to ever feel instability." "He won't," I said gently. "Not if you're honest." The front door opened again. Miranda returned, but something about her expression had changed. Resolved. Steady. "I've made a decision," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "What decision?" She looked at both of us. "We're not selling." Relief flickered across Ethan's face. "But," she continued, "we are downsizing our lifestyle." Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means no private daycare. It means no luxury car. It means no pretending we're further ahead than we are." Silence filled the room. Then she added softly, "And it means I stop trying to control everything out of fear." Her eyes met mine briefly. Apology without words. I nodded slightly. Acceptance without judgment. Ethan stood and pulled her into a hug. A real one. Not tense. Not forced. Relief mixed with humility. And for the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. But just as we settled into that fragile hope, Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked down at the screen. His face went pale. "What?" Miranda asked immediately. He didn't answer. He just stared. "Ethan?" I pressed. He swallowed. My stomach tightened. "What about?" He looked up slowly. "There's a second offer." Miranda blinked. "But we just decided." He shook his head. "That's not the issue." "Then what is?" I asked carefully. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It's not a stranger." The room went very still. "Who is it?" Miranda asked. Ethan looked at me. Directly. Uncomfortably. "It's someone we know." The silence after Ethan said, "It's someone we know," felt like the air had been pulled out of the room. Miranda's fingers tightened around the edge of the dining chair. "Who?" she asked again, slower this time. Ethan looked down at his phone as if hoping the name would change. "It's Daniel." The name landed hard. Daniel. The same Daniel. The friend. The one whose startup had swallowed $200,000. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misheard. "Daniel? As in Daniel from the investment?" I asked carefully. Ethan nodded once. Miranda's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she whispered. "He's offering above asking," Ethan said, his voice flat. "Above asking." The words rang hollow. Miranda took a step back, as if the room had tilted. "Why would he?" she started, then stopped. Because we all knew the question underneath. Why would a man whose business had collapsed suddenly have enough liquidity to buy a house? And not just any house. Their house. "Did the realtor say anything else?" I asked. Ethan scrolled through the message again. "He wants a quick close. Cash-heavy offer. Minimal contingencies." Cash-heavy. Minimal contingencies. This wasn't a struggling entrepreneur scraping by. This was someone positioned. Strategic. Prepared. Miranda shook her head slowly. No, this doesn't make sense." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I trusted him." Miranda's eyes flashed with something sharper now. "You trusted him with $200,000. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was wounded. Ethan flinched. And I realized this wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about betrayal. "Call the realtor," I said calmly. Ethan looked at me. "Ask if Daniel disclosed anything about his financial source." Miranda crossed her arms, defensive energy rising. "You think he planned this?" "I think," I said carefully, That coincidences involving money rarely exist. Ethan hesitated, then dialed. We sat in silence while it rang. He put it on speaker. "Hi, Ethan," the realtor answered cheerfully. "Exciting news, right? Where did Daniel get the funds?" Ethan asked bluntly. A pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss buyer financing," she replied smoothly. "Did he sell something?" Ethan pressed. "Again, I can't disclose details." Ethan ended the call without another word. Miranda looked at him slowly. "You think he used our investment?" The words felt poisonous in the air. "Let's be clear. Businesses fail. Startups collapse. Investments are risky. But if Daniel's company had dissolved, if contracts were airtight, if funds were supposedly depleted, then how was he suddenly flush with cash? And why target this house? Not any property. This one. The one they were forced to list because of that loss." Miranda began pacing. "This is humiliation," she said under her breath. "It's not humiliation," I corrected gently. "It's information." Ethan looked torn between anger and disbelief. "He wouldn't do that," he muttered. "You said that about the investment too," Miranda replied quietly. That hit him hard. "Before we jump to conclusions," I said calmly, "we need facts." Ethan exhaled sharply. "And how do we get them?" "You meet him." Miranda stopped pacing. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Why would he admit anything?" "Because," I replied evenly, "if he thinks you're desperate enough to sell, he believes he has leverage." Ethan stared at me. "And if he doesn't?" "Then you watch his body language." Miranda's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think this is bigger than the house?" "I think," I said slowly, "that sometimes people test boundaries to see how far they can push." Miranda's voice hardened. "If he profited from us." "We don't know that," Ethan interrupted, but his confidence sounded thinner now. That night, sleep didn't come easily. For any of us. The next morning, Ethan called Daniel. Kept it casual. Told him they were considering offers. Suggested coffee. Daniel agreed immediately. Too quickly. Miranda noticed it too. "He didn't hesitate," she said after Ethan hung up. "He didn't sound surprised," which meant he had expected a call. "They asked me to come along. Not to speak. Just to observe." I agreed. Because sometimes a third perspective sees what emotion hides. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Daniel was already there. Dressed sharper than usual. New watch. Confident posture. He stood when Ethan approached, smiling broadly. "Man. Small world. Huh." Ethan forced a polite smile. "Yeah. Small." Miranda sat stiffly beside him. I took the seat across from Daniel. He looked at me briefly. Recognition flickered. Respect? No. Assessment. "So," Daniel began casually, "I figured if you were selling, I'd rather keep it in the circle." The circle. As if friendship were currency. "Where did you get the capital?" Miranda asked directly. Daniel's smile faltered just slightly. "Investors," he said smoothly. "For what?" Ethan pressed. "The pivot." "What pivot?" Miranda demanded. Daniel leaned back. "The business didn't fail. It restructured." Ethan froze. "That's not what you said." Daniel shrugged lightly. "Timing was bad. Communication broke down. Happens." Miranda's voice sharpened. "You told us everything collapsed." Daniel's eyes shifted briefly. "From your perspective, it did." Silence. Cold. Precise. "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, his voice low now. Daniel clasped his hands together. "It means not every investor survives a restructuring." The words landed like a slap. "You cut us out," Miranda whispered. Daniel didn't deny it. "You signed the contract," he replied calmly. "You knew the risk." Ethan's face went pale. "So you restructured without informing us." "It was legal," Daniel said quickly. "Legal?" Miranda repeated, her voice trembling with restrained fury. I watched him closely. No remorse. No discomfort. Only calculation. He hadn't just made a business move. He had eliminated them as obstacles. And now he wanted their house. Why? Leverage. Control. Or perhaps something simpler. Victory. Ethan stood abruptly. You let us think everything was gone. Daniel shrugged again. I didn't owe you operational updates. Miranda leaned forward. You owed us honesty. Daniel's jaw tightened. Business isn't emotional. There it was. The dividing line. To him, this had always been numbers. To Ethan and Miranda, it had been trust. And now you want our house, Ethan said slowly. It's a good investment, Daniel replied smoothly. I know the area. I know the comps. I know your urgency. Urgency. He said it like leverage. Like he could smell desperation. Miranda's eyes flashed. We're not desperate. Daniel smirked faintly. Then don't sell. It was a challenge. Not a suggestion. Ethan looked at Miranda. Something shifted in his expression. Clarity. Resolve. He turned back to Daniel. Offer rejected. Daniel blinked. You haven't even negotiated. We're not selling to you, Ethan said firmly. Daniel's expression hardened. That's emotional. Yes, Miranda said sharply. It is. Daniel stood slowly. Business is business. And family is family, Ethan replied. Daniel gave a thin smile. Good luck covering the mortgage. And he walked away. The cafe felt quieter after he left. Miranda exhaled shakily. I want to scream. Ethan sat back down slowly. I can't believe I trusted him. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. You trusted the version of him you wanted to see. Miranda nodded faintly. We almost handed him our house. But you didn't, I said. And that matters. On the drive home, silence filled the car. But it wasn't panic anymore. It was clarity. At the house, Oliver ran to the door when we entered. Grandma! He hugged my legs tightly. And something about that simple gesture reminded me, homes aren't just property. They're protection, memory, stability. Daniel wanted more than square footage. He wanted control over the narrative. But Ethan had just taken it back. That evening, Ethan called the realtor. Take the house off the market. Miranda looked at him. Certain. Are you sure? Yes. She nodded. Then we rebuild here. He looked at her with quiet strength. Together. But just as hope began to settle, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something told me not to. I answered. Hello. A calm, unfamiliar voice replied. Is this Mrs. Harper? Yes. This is from the State Financial Compliance Office. My heart skipped. We're conducting a review related to Daniel Mercer's restructuring. The room went still. Ethan and Miranda looked at me instantly. The voice continued. Your name appears on early-stage investor documentation. I swallowed slowly. What does that mean? It means, the voice said carefully, you may not have been informed of material changes. The words sent a chill down my spine. Material changes. Uninformed investors. Compliance review. This wasn't just for a few seconds after the call ended. None of us spoke. The words from the compliance officer kept echoing in my mind. Your name appears on early-stage investor documentation. Material changes. You may not have been informed. Ethan was the first to break the silence. What did they mean by that? He asked carefully. Miranda looked just as confused. I took a slow breath. I think Daniel didn't just betray trust. They both watched me closely. I think he may have broken the law. The room went still. Miranda sat down slowly at the kitchen table. Wait, she said, trying to piece it together. You're saying he restructured the company, but didn't notify investors? That's what it sounds like, I replied. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. But he said we signed contracts. Yes, I said. But contracts don't cancel disclosure requirements. Miranda leaned forward. So he might have hidden information? Possibly. Ethan ran his hands through his hair. I can't believe this. Neither could I. But suddenly Daniel's confidence in the cafe made more sense. People who operate in gray areas often assume no one will challenge them. They rely on silence. and shame. The next morning I received another call. This time the compliance officer introduced himself properly. Mrs. Harper, my name is Robert Keller. I work with the State Financial Compliance Office. His voice was calm, professional, but there was seriousness beneath it. I'd like to ask a few questions about your investment in Mercer Technologies. My stomach tightened slightly. Of course. He asked about the timeline, how Ethan met Daniel, when the investment happened, what communication followed. I answered everything honestly. Then he asked something that surprised me. Did Mr. Mercer ever inform you of a restructuring plan? No, I said immediately. Did he present documents requesting investor approval? No. There was a short pause. I heard the sound of papers shifting on his end. That's helpful, he said quietly. Helpful. The word didn't sound casual. It sounded significant. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Miranda came over. They looked anxious the moment they walked in. What did they say? Ethan asked. I told them about the call, about the questions, about the restructuring. Miranda's eyes slowly widened. So he really did it, she whispered. Did what? Ethan asked. Cut us out. Ethan sank into the couch. But he said it was legal. Miranda shook her head. Of course he said that. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Daniel stopped contacting Ethan completely. No texts, no calls, no follow-up about the house offer. At first Ethan thought it was coincidence. Then the compliance office contacted him directly. They wanted his statement too. That's when things began to feel real. Very real. Ethan came home from that meeting pale. He lied, he said quietly. Miranda looked up immediately. What do you mean? They showed me documents. He sat down slowly. There was another investor meeting after hours. My chest tightened. And we weren't invited? No. Miranda's voice turned sharp. So he replaced us. Ethan nodded. They raised more money, brought in new investors. But our money? I asked. Ethan swallowed. It stayed in the company. Miranda blinked. So our $200,000 helped build the new version? Yes. The realization hung heavily in the air. Daniel hadn't lost the money. He had used it, then pushed them out. Miranda's anger was different now. It wasn't emotional chaos anymore. It was focused, cold. That's fraud, she said quietly. Ethan looked uncertain. I don't know if it's technically fraud. But before either of them could continue, my phone rang again. The same number. I answered. Mrs. Harper, this is Robert Keller again. His tone sounded more direct this time. Yes. We've reviewed additional records. I held my breath. And Mr. Mercer appears to have failed to disclose restructuring information to